Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a whole stack of sources and really pull out those key bits of knowledge, giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're embarking on a profound and deeply human exploration. We're diving into a topic that touches so many lives: trauma.
Yeah, it's everywhere when you start looking.
It really is. And our sources for this deep dive, they're incredibly rich, quite personal too. We're talking decades of clinical experience, some groundbreaking research, and really intimate patient stories. Our mission today, to really get our heads around how horrific experiences don't just leave, psychological scars. They fundamentally reshape our brains, our bodies, our very sense of who we are.
It's a whole system impact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And crucially, we'll look at the, surprising and pretty diverse paths to healing that can emerge when we truly understand what's actually going on beneath the surface. So let's dive in. When we talk about trauma, based on our sources, it's often defined as something unbearable and intolerable, like an experience so overwhelming your system just can't process it properly.
It overwhelms your coping mechanisms.
Right. And the material shows how victims, whether it's combat, assault, whatever, they often try to push these memories away, act like nothing happened, just try to move on.
Yeah, that denial phase or just suppression.
But it takes, and this is a quote, tremendous energy to keep functioning while carrying the memory of terror and the shame of utter weakness and vulnerability.
It's exhausting. Absolutely exhausting.
So this isn't just a fleeting bad moment. It fundamentally reshapes how you exist in the world, day to day. And here's where it gets really insightful, I think. The ripple effect. It isn't just confined to the direct victim.
No, definitely not.
Our sources talk about soldiers maybe frightening their families with these unpredictable rages, wives of men with PTSD becoming deeply depressed themselves, and even children of depressed mothers often growing up insecure, anxious. It just cascades through relationships.
It really does. And what's especially compelling there is how early experiences, say family violence, can make it incredibly difficult for those kids later as adults to establish stable, trusting relationships.
Right.
So it raises this critical question, how deep does this trauma really go? Does it echo into our relational lives, affecting not just people around us now, but maybe even generations down the line?
Like an intergenerational shadow.
Yeah, exactly. Subtly shaping future dynamics.
Wow. To make this really concrete, let's talk about Tom. He's a Vietnam veteran in one of our sources. 10 years after his service, he's spending a holiday weekend totally isolated in his law office, just drinking, looking at old photos.
Avoiding the triggers.
Totally. He knew the usual celebration stuff, the noise, fireworks, summer heat, even a family picnic would trigger intense distress because it all reminded him of Vietnam.
The sensory overload.
Yeah. And when he got agitated, he was terrified of being around his family. He said he behaved like a monster with his wife and his 2 young boys.
That fear of losing control.
Exactly. The sounds of his own kids playing could just drive him to storm out, desperately trying to keep himself from hurting them.
That's heartbreaking.
And it gets deeper. Tom was terrified of becoming like his own father, who was always angry, rarely connected, except to kind of compare his kids unfavorably to friends lost in the Battle of the Bulge back in '44.
So the pattern was already there.
Right. And when the doctor offered Tom medication for his nightmares, he actually refused.
Oh, why?
He explained, "I realize that if I take the pills and the nightmares go away, I will have abandoned my friends and their deaths will have been in vain. I need to be a living memorial to my friends who died in Vietnam."
Wow. That really connects to a larger point, doesn't it? For many traumatized people, the very event that caused them so much pain had also become their sole source of meaning.
It's a terrible paradox.
Yeah. They felt fully alive only when they were revisiting their traumatic past. But for Tom, well, there was something even darker. A more horrific memory eventually surfaced after months of just paralyzing shame. Revenge acts. In a Vietnamese village, he'd participated in killing children, shooting an innocent farmer, the rape of a woman. After that memory broke through, it became truly impossible for him to, quote, go home again in any meaningful way.
I can't even imagine.
And it shows how trauma, whether it's something done to you or something you yourself have done, it almost invariably corrodes your ability to have close, intimate relationships.
Yeah. And back then, professionals really struggled to help veterans like Tom, didn't they?
They absolutely did.
Often mislabeled, right? Alcoholism, depression, even schizophrenia sometimes.
And the treatments available then were often, well, ineffective. Sometimes they even made things worse.
Triggering flashbacks.
Exactly, which led many to just drop out of treatment altogether.
So the turning point, as the sources show it, came in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
A group of Vietnam vets, really determined and supported by psychoanalysts like James Shatan and Robert J. Lifton, they successfully lobbied the American Psychiatric Association.
A huge effort.
And they created a new diagnosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD.
Which was monumental.
Absolutely. It gave a name to the suffering, finally, for people overwhelmed by horror and helplessness. And it just unleashed this explosion of research, a real push to find effective treatments.
It legitimized the suffering in a way.
Totally. So what does this history really mean? It means for generations, this profound suffering didn't even have a widely recognized name.
Think about that. Millions suffering in silence.
Or misdiagnosed, blamed, unable to even start healing because there wasn't even a common language to see their pain in the medical world. It just fundamentally shaped how we even think about human suffering and resilience.
It really did. Which leads us to, okay, what is happening physiologically?
Yeah, because early observations in psychiatric care often missed a huge piece of the puzzle. Our sources talk about morning rounds where doctors would discuss symptoms, clinically. Right. But rarely mention the stories of childhood assault, neglect, witnessing violence, even though these things affect more than half the people who seek psychiatric care.
The ecology of their lives, as one source puts it, was ignored.
Exactly. And this disconnect even showed up physically. Patients often described as strikingly clumsy, uncoordinated. Even their conversations felt stilted, lacking that natural flow of gestures and expression.
It's like the trauma gets lodged in the body.
That's what the sources strongly suggest. Trauma is profoundly held in people's bodies, not just their minds.
And this physical side is deeply tied to what's happening inside the brain.
Okay, let's get into that. The brain on trauma. What do we know?
Well, consider Marcia's case from the research. 13 years after her trauma, just seeing images related to it caused her amygdala, that's the brain's fear center, to light up with alarm.
Even though she was just resting quietly in a scanner.
Exactly. It triggered a whole cascade of stress hormones, physical arousal, what the researchers called a frantic arousal. Her body was still on high alert even after all that time. Wow. And what's really remarkable here is how the brain reacted during flashbacks. Scans showed activation only on the right side, the intuitive, emotional, artistic side.
Okay.
And meanwhile, the left hemisphere, the rational, logical side, it showed deactivation. It essentially went offline.
So it's not just a feeling, it's a measurable brain state. The thinking part shuts down.
Precisely. In PTSD, that critical balance between the amygdala, think of it as the smoke detector scanning for danger, and the medial prefrontal cortex, the watchtower that interprets and regulates, that balance shifts radically.
Making it much harder to control emotions and impulses.
Exactly. You might find yourself startling at any loud sound, becoming enraged by tiny frustrations, or just freezing up if someone touches you unexpectedly.
Why does that happen so fast?
It's because sensory information can take a low road, going straight from the sensory intake point, the thalamus, directly to the amygdala. Lightning speed threat detection.
Bypassing the thinking part.
Right. It bypasses the high road, which goes through the prefrontal cortex for more careful interpretation, so your body can react, jump, freeze, fight before your conscious mind even knows why.
A survival mechanism.
Absolutely life-saving in a real threat. But for trauma survivors, it becomes this daily challenge, leaving them feeling constantly on edge, out of control.
And this brain-body disconnect you mentioned, it means some people are so out of touch internally, they don't even realize they're physically sick.
That's right. We see it with significant somatic symptoms, chronic pain, migraines, digestive issues, asthma.
Asthma? Really?
Yeah, the sources cite that traumatized children are 50 times more likely to have asthma than non-traumatized kids.
50 times? That's staggering.
And here's a really sobering finding. Studies showed many children and adults who had fatal asthma attacks were not aware of having breathing problems before the attacks.
Their bodies were shutting down, but their minds weren't getting the signal.
Exactly. The internal distress signals weren't registering consciously.
Is there a name for that disconnect?
It often ties into a concept called alexithymia. People describe it like, I don't know what I feel. It's like my head and body aren't connected. I'm living in a tunnel, a fog.
And brain scans back this up.
They do. These individuals show less activity in the self-sensing areas of the brain, like the insula.
So What happens then if you can't feel what's going on inside?
Well, for some, tragically, self-harm can become a desperate kind of solution.
How so?
Patients like Sherry and Marilyn in the sources, they picked or cut themselves not because they were suicidal, but to feel more alive, to break through an overwhelming numbness.
But it made them feel ashamed?
Deeply ashamed, yes. It's this complex cycle. See, our emotional brain is constantly looking out for us, releasing hormones, creating visceral sensations to get us moving, influencing everything from big decisions to small preferences.
Like who we trust or what feels off.
Exactly. And Stephen Porges's theory adds another layer. He suggests that while we mammals are naturally somewhat on guard, feeling emotionally close requires temporarily shutting down that defensive system. But trauma cranks up that defense system into hypervigilance or sometimes shuts it down into numbness. So people might no longer run when they should be trying to escape or fight back.
That's terrifying. The sources mention women with early abuse being more likely to be raped later.
Yes, a shocking statistic. 7 times more likely. It shows how that past trauma can make someone vulnerable, perhaps by impairing their threat detection or response system, the past tragically echoing in the present.
This leads us to a really important piece of research. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study.
Absolutely groundbreaking.
It basically showed that traumatic experiences in childhood are just far more common than expected.
Mm.
Even in the initial study group, mostly white, middle-class, well-educated people, only a third reported no adverse childhood experiences.
And over a quarter reported repeated physical abuse.
It really blew the lid off assumptions about who experiences trauma.
It really did. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it profoundly changes how we view certain issues. Take Feliti's discovery about obesity.
Right, often seen just as a public health problem.
But for many of his patients, particularly those with histories of sexual abuse, obesity was actually a personal solution. A way to feel less desirable, perhaps, or create a physical barrier. Protection.
So mistaking that solution for the problem could lead to failed treatments.
Exactly. Or even new problems like suicidality emerging after weight loss surgery because the underlying trauma wasn't addressed.
And this ties into a shift in research focus too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Away from purely genetic causes for mental illness.
Yes. For decades, millions were poured into finding specific genes for things like schizophrenia, but they largely failed to find consistent genetic patterns.
So it's not just about the genes you have.
It's more about epigenetics, how our experiences, especially stressful ones, affect gene expression, how genes get turned on or off.
Like the environment actually changing biology.
Precisely. Studies show specific gene modifications in abused children, regardless of social class. Even in children whose mothers experienced the Quebec ice storm while pregnant, our environment literally interacts with our genes.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit to memory itself, because trauma radically transforms how memory works.
Absolutely. Ordinary memory is adaptive, right? It's social, flexible. We tell stories for a purpose. They change over time.
We integrate them.
Yeah. But traumatic memory, it's profoundly different. Our sources describe it as precipitated by specific triggers, not condensed. It doesn't get neatly filed away.
It stays raw.
Very raw. Its reenactment serves no function to the present. It's frozen in time, unchanging, and always feels lonely, humiliating, and alienating.
Like Julian's case, the one involving Father Shanley, his memories were just incoherent fragments.
More like a reenactment than a remembering. He'd say things like, Father Shanley was the closest thing to God in my neighborhood, even while describing the abuse, that dissociation.
And this creates a massive challenge, right, for doctors, police. How do you recognize trauma when someone reenacts rather than remembers?
Their testimony can seem chaotic, confused, fragmented, easily dismissed.
It's like your brain is playing this cruel trick, constantly yanking you back into the past. Not as a story you tell, but as a living nightmare you're forced to relive.
One survivor wrote incredibly powerfully, "It is as if time is folded or warped, so that the past and present merge as if I were physically transported into the past." Like Nancy's email about the iron in the scrub suit triggering her hospital trauma years later.
That sense of time collapsing.
And our sources also mention something called switching that clinicians see. Patients activate distinctly different emotional and physiological states.
Like flipping a switch.
Almost. It's like a radio suddenly tuning to a different station, new mood, new song, changes in voice, expression, posture. sometimes even seeming like a different identity.
There was an example of handwriting changing.
Yeah, becoming more childlike when writing about fears. It shows this profound internal state shift.
And sleep plays a role here too, right? It's supposed to help process memories.
It is. Normally, REM sleep and deep sleep reshape memory, strengthening important emotional information, letting irrelevant stuff fade. It's how we integrate experiences.
But in PTSD,
That process fails. Veterans with PTSD often wake themselves up right when they hit REM sleep because a trauma fragment gets activated in a dream. They can't get that restorative processing.
so the memories stay stuck, unprocessed.
Exactly. Which brings us to how these patterns might start really early in childhood relationships.
Okay, John Bowlby's work, observing mothers and children.
Right. His observations in Regent's Park were key. He noticed how when infants and young children notice that their mothers are not fully engaged with them, they become nervous.
That need for connection is primal.
Absolutely. It highlights the vital idea of attunement. Developing secure attachment depends on this emotional resonance, starting at subtle physical levels, the gaze, the tone of voice, the holding. It gives babies that deep feeling of being seen, met, understood.
And our sources say our most intimate sense of self is created in our minute-to-minute exchanges with our caregivers.
It's foundational, which is why the consequences of disorganized attachment are so profound and so often intertwined with trauma.
What does that look like? Disorganized attachment.
Well, the sources describe different patterns. Mothers may be too preoccupied with their own issues, perhaps intrusive or hostile, often with their own history of abuse or witnessing violence.
Or the opposite.
Or mothers who seemed helpless and fearful, maybe didn't know how to be the adult, even wanted comfort from their children. Often they had histories of sexual abuse or losing a parent early on.
And the finding that 1 in 4 patients couldn't recall anyone they felt safe with as a child.
Just think about that for a moment. Imagine being a child, having no source of safety, making your way into the world totally unprotected, unseen.
It's devastating.
And our sources stress that when abuse comes from parents or partners, the people who should be your protectors, it knocks out the most important protection against being traumatized, being sheltered by the people you love.
Leading to, well, all sorts of issues.
Dissociation, despair, addictions, deep alienation. And sometimes behaviors we label as problems, oppositional defiant behavior, for instance, are actually desperate, though maybe maladaptive, solutions. Yeah. Rage and withdrawal are only facets of a whole range of desperate attempts at survival from an unmanageable past, maybe trying to gain control or protect oneself. We often miss the underlying why.
Okay, so given all this complexity, the brain, the body, memory, relationships, how does healing even begin?
It's a huge challenge, but it's absolutely possible. And recovery isn't just about, making the memories less intense.
Not just desensitization.
No, our sources emphasize restoring executive functioning, your ability to plan, focus, regulate, rebuilding self-confidence, reclaiming the capacity for playfulness, creativity.
Living fully in the present.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And ultimately, a key quote, recovery from trauma involves reconnecting with our fellow human beings. It requires environments of real safety, physical and emotional. Safety from being shamed, judged, dismissed.
Relationship is key.
Crucial.
Now, for years, talk therapy was kind of the main approach, right?
The go-to, yeah.
But look at this. Finding a survey of 9/11 survivors asked what was most helpful in overcoming their trauma effects. The top answers were acupuncture, massage, yoga, and EMDR. In that order.
That's really telling, isn't it? It suggests we need a much broader view of healing.
So it raises the question, if trauma is so deeply rooted in the body and brain, is just talking about it enough?
Right. What good is it if it's not the only path, maybe not even the primary path for some? Our sources are clear. Healing often must involve addressing the trauma held in the body.
Because the engines of post-traumatic reactions are located in the emotional brain.
Manifesting physically. Those gut-wrenching sensations, heart-pounding, breathing becoming fast and shallow. You feel it in your body.
So how do you change that deep-seated threat system?
The sources describe 2 main ways. You can work from the top down, using the thinking brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, to send modulating messages down.
Like cognitive approaches.
Right. Or you can work from the bottom up, engaging the reptilian brain, the brainstem, through things like breathing, movement, and touch. directly influencing those primal survival responses.
And this understanding opens up all these innovative, holistic approaches.
Exactly, like body-based therapies, yoga, for instance.
Yeah, tell me about that.
One study showed 10 weeks of yoga markedly reduced PTSD symptoms in patients who hadn't responded to any medication or other treatments. It improved their arousal regulation and their relationship with their own bodies.
Like that participant Annie said, your body has things to say.
Such a powerful quote. And we also see mindfulness, like John Kabat-Zinn's work. Seeing mindfulness as a lens, taking the scattered and reactive energies of your mind and focusing them into a coherent source of energy.
Helping you stay present without being swept away.
Precisely. Even something like kickboxing.
Really?
Yeah, Sandy's story in the sources. She learned to link her physical sensations to her emotions through kickboxing. The result, no emergency room visits for 3 years. She found a healthy outlet for that intense energy.
Wow. What about sensoromotor therapy?
That's fascinating, too. The story of Ying Mi, a 5-year-old girl adopted from China, completely mute. She started talking after therapy involving baths in the tub with plastic balls, swaying on swings, crawling under weighted blankets.
Sensory integration.
Exactly, helping her regulate her sensory system, connect with her environment safely, which finally allowed her voice to emerge.
Amazing. And then there's EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Right. Maggie's remarkable experience described in the sources, remembering incest from inside her child's body, but simultaneously observing it from her adult self.
That dual awareness.
Yeah, which led to this life-changing realization. It wasn't my fault. I was a little girl, and there was nothing I could do to keep him from molesting me. Studies confirm EMDR is a powerful treatment for stuck traumatic memories.
It lets the brain finally process and file it away.
That seems to be the idea, like it unsticks the memory.
Okay, what about internal family systems, IFS?
Another really compelling model. IFS uses this powerful metaphor. Your mind isn't just one unified you, but more like an internal family with different parts.
Parts, like what?
Protective parts, vulnerable child parts, angry parts, critical parts. In trauma, these parts can get polarized, stuck in conflict like an internal civil war.
Right.
IFS helps you access your core self, that calm, compassionate, confident center, to become the leader of this internal family, understand the part's positive intentions, and bring harmony back through inner dialogue, like helping Peter see his critic part was just trying to protect him from being hurt again.
So you work with the parts, not against them.
Exactly. And there's also psychomotor therapy using structures. This involves creating virtual memories, using physical space and other people.
Virtual memories.
Yeah, experiences designed to live alongside the painful past ones, providing sensory experiences of feeling seen, supported, maybe held. Maria's example, physically positioning group members to represent her family, giving tangible form to her inner world and letting her experience new relational dynamics right there in the room.
That sounds intense, but powerful.
Very. And finally, neurofeedback, working directly with brainwaves.
How does that work?
Essentially, it gives your brain real-time feedback on its own activity, helping it learn to regulate itself better. Lisa's story is striking. She stopped dissociating. The constant hum of low-level conversations in my head stopped after neurofeedback. She said, everything just came together.
And studies back this up.
Yeah, studies on combat veterans show improvements in alpha waves linked to relaxation and better frontal lobe activity linked to focus. It seems promising for a range of issues, helping the brain find its own equilibrium.
This is all truly extraordinary. We've looked at these individual therapies, but humans, we're social creatures.
definitely and mentally.
And healing often seems to involve returning to collective experiences, to connection.
Absolutely. Think of Nick's story. Years debilitated by chronic fatigue, then he joins an improv theater class.
And gets cast in West Side Story.
Yeah, as action. And suddenly he starts walking differently, embodying this strong, respected character, a total transformation.
And veterans finding it transformative to speak about war memories on stage, more than traditional therapy.
Yes, that comes up too. There's something about that shared space, that witness.
That makes you wonder, could ancient Greek theater have been partly a ritual reintegration for combat veterans?
It's a fascinating thought. The audience, the performers, often citizen soldiers who'd lived the conflicts being depicted.
And even things like military drills. Prince Maurice's close order drill with drums and trumpets.
Creating rhythm, synchrony, purpose, bonding people together. And that incredible example, the singing revolution in Estonia.
300,000 people singing forbidden patriotic songs.
Leading to independence from the Soviets. As one source put it, imagine the scene in Casablanca. multiply its power by a factor of thousands. That collective expression was healing. It was change.
It's astounding how these collective rituals tap into something so basic in us. Theater helps, the sources say, because it's about embodying emotions, giving voice to them, becoming rhythmically engaged.
And that collective confrontation with the realities of the human condition. Mirroring exercises, too. They help people attune viscerally, not cognitively, get out of their heads and just connect.
The urban improv program for schools showed real results, right?
Remarkable results. Substantially fewer fights and angry outbursts, more cooperation and self-assertion, plus more attentiveness and engagement.
Even if kids initially sided with the aggressor in the skit.
Yeah, but through the process, they gradually got the students to experiment with new roles, showing them different possibilities, shifting perspectives.
And this is crucial because when kids learn to name emotional experiences become enlanguaged through performance.
They discover they have many different emotions, and importantly, that these emotions can be expressed, understood, managed. Identifying the truth of an experience, giving it voice, even simulated voice, is essential for healing.
Which leads back to agency. Resilience is the product of agency. Knowing that what you do can make a difference.
Such a key takeaway, feeling like you have some control, some impact.
So our deep dive today. Wow, it's taken us through the devastating but incredibly complex impact of trauma. Not just the mind, but profoundly the body, the brain.
Yeah, seeing how memories get stuck, how those early relationships really lay down a blueprint.
And how things that look like problems might actually be attempts at solutions.
Right. And what's truly compelling, I think, is the sheer breadth of pathways to healing that open up once we understand trauma isn't just psychological or even just a brain thing. It's a fundamental dysregulation of our entire organism.
So healing is about restoring that sense of safety, connection.
Exactly. Whether it's through the wisdom of the body and movement, or the quiet courage of deep inner work with parts, or the amazing power of collective shared experience.
So what does all this really mean for you listening? I think it means recognizing that healing is, well, it's dynamic, it's complex. It often requires us to really listen to our bodies, listen to stories maybe too painful to tell aloud yet. It means the path forward isn't always straight, not always linear. And sometimes the biggest breakthroughs pop up in the most unexpected places. A theater stage, a yoga mat, maybe just rediscovering the rhythm of your own breath.
Finding those moments of safety and presence.
Yeah. And maybe, as you reflect on all this, here's a provocative thought to leave you with. If so many people are suffering silently, not remembering trauma as a neat story, but reenacting it through their bodies, their behaviors, their relationships, what personal shifts, what societal shifts might happen if we truly learn to listen to the whole language of trauma?
The body's language, the brain's language, the silences.
Right. Instead of just diagnosing symptoms and looking for a quick fix, what if really understanding the depth of the wound could lead us all to more profound and ultimately more human ways of healing?